Gabby, you starstruck? You get starstruck.
I'm always starstruck.
Or you just get struck by stars.
I'm in a constant state of struckness, yeah.
So like that.
No, my earliest foray into starstruckness was my grandparents took me to a Mandy Patinkin concert when I was 4, and he called me up on stage.
Who is this?
Mandy Patinkin.
Oh.
And I was so nervous. I got up to the front of the stage, and then I went back and do it. So since then,
you have been in training to be more control.
Oh yeah.
I now understand you better.
Yeah, and I've also just realized this mic is hot, so I think a lot of people maybe understand it better too. Yeah, we'll turn that off for now.
That's right. Oh, wait a minute. And so the novel was written. Yeah, they were looking for someone.
Give it maybe one more minute. We'll start in just 1 minute. Let folks filter into the room and the virtual room. With an iron fist. Yep. All right. Well, for the sake of time, because I know we're all really eager to get into discussion today, let's get started. If somebody could maybe close the door, just because there's a lot of noise that comes in. Thank you, thank you. Hello, everyone. To those of you who don't know me or aren't sick of my voice by now, I'm Gabby Cornish. I'm assistant professor of musicology at the University of Miami's Frost School of Music. I'm also a University of Rochester alumna, and I'm one of the co-organizers with Rita Safaryants of Tsoifest 2022. I'm so excited to present this roundtable to you all today. We've had a wonderful 24 hours, give or take, of Tsoifest. Last night we had a film screening and a concert, which was pretty hardcore. And for us, for Rita and I, especially when we started planning Tsoifest, we began in fall 2019, actually, and the goal was to mark 30 years since Viktor Tsoi's death in 1990. Now, spring of 2020, a lot of things happened, and that then became less than ideal for conference and concerts and mosh pits like we had last night. And in the intervening 2 years, a lot has changed in the sort of socio-cultural and political landscapes of Eastern Europe and the post-Soviet sphere especially. And so we do want to take a moment to acknowledge that right now there's a very real war of aggression in Ukraine that is both immoral and illegal. I think actually referendums are taking place as we speak, illegal referendums. And so our love and support goes out to the people of Ukraine as well as anti-war activists in Russia and beyond. And so we do want to take a moment to acknowledge that. So today we are so lucky to have two amazing guests joining us. Originally, the plan was to have a third guest, Sasha Tsoi, Viktor Tsoi's one and only son. Unfortunately, for a variety of personal and political reasons, Sasha was not able to join us today. But never fear, because we've got two of the most interesting, wonderful people I've ever encountered in my scholarly career. I was asked just before this began if I ever get starstruck. I am very much starstruck by the two folks that we'll have joining us today. So to start, I'd like to introduce the one and only Joanna Stingray, who hopefully folks both in this room and to our viewers at home, hello to the FSB and perhaps FBI agents watching from afar. Hopefully you were able to catch Joanna's keynote just earlier this afternoon. Joanna Stingray is an author and musician from Los Angeles, California, who lived for many years in Russia. In 1984, while touring in the Soviet Union, she met and befriended Boris Grebenshchikov, a revered musical poet whom many Soviets called the Russian Dylan. I think that we should call Bob Dylan the American Grebenshchikov, maybe. And soon became the first American producer of underground rock and roll when she released the double album Red Wave, 4 underground bands from the USSR, a compilation of music she had smuggled out in 1985. A frequent traveler in and out of Russia, Joanna was interrogated by the KGB and FBI, both of whom thought she was a spy. And in 1987, she became an enemy of the state. Her visa was blocked to keep her from entering the Soviet Union to marry Leningrad guitarist Yuri Kasparyan. After months of intervention by the State Department, she returned, married Yuri in the early 90s, and became a TV host, recording artist, and well-known rock personality throughout Russia. She's published several books in both English and Russian about her time in the music scene, as well as quite a few photos from her own personal collection. Her most recent book, which those in attendance can buy a signed copy of today, is called Red Wave, An American in the Soviet Music Underground, and it was released with Doppelhaus Press in 2020. Please join me in welcoming Joanna Stingray. Our second guest tonight, or this afternoon, what time is it? You're coming in from LA time, so it could be the morning. Our second guest today is the one and only Rashid Nugmanov, who's dear friends with Joanna, and I've been enjoying watching their escapades throughout Rochester, New York the past few days. Rashid Nugmanov is a Kazakh film director, dissident, political activist, and founder of the Kazakh New Wave cinema movement. His directorial debut, The Needle, or Igla, from 1988, starring the popular rock musician Viktor Tsoi, became a tremendous success. After moving to Paris in 1993, Nugmanov has served as the general director of the International Freedom Network, a London-based think tank created to foster democracy in the former Soviet Union. For those of us lucky enough to see the film screening last night and chat with him afterwards, we learned that some of his biggest directorial influences are Dziga Vertov and John Cassavetes, who shaped his approach to improvisational directing, which was interesting for me to hear since I was just scarred at a very early age seeing John Cassavetes in Rosemary's Baby. So it's nice to think of something good to come out of that. So please join me in welcoming Rashid Nugmanov. So just to get things, just to get things kicked off, I'm really interested if you could both tell us how you came to know both Viktor Tsoi and the rest of the sort of Leningrad music scene, and also how the friendship that you two share developed and was formed.
Go ahead, I was speaking.
Okay. Well, first time when I heard the music of Viktor Tsoi and his band Kino, there are two of them there at the moment in '82, he and Lyosha Ryba. Just like they would play acoustic music and with very bad quality recording. And my friend, who by the way was here last night, he came from Toronto. He lived in Almaty, my old friend. He brought a tape of very bad quality to me and said, listen to it, because I want to erase it. I need this tape for some other reasons. But before I erase it, maybe you'll be interested in taking a listen. I listened to it, and I since then he never saw this tape again, because I kept it with me, because immediately I felt something. I knew very well by the time Aquarium, because the tapes were distributed. It was a large network of samizdat tapes in the Soviet Union and in Kazakhstan also as well. So, and I knew Mike Naumenko in Zoopark, but those guys, I never heard of them. And my friend said the group called Kino. Okay. At the moment, I was an architect. I didn't think about movie making. And I was writing some kind of half documentary, half fictional novel about the 60s in the city, the capital of Kazakhstan, about the so-called stilyagi. It's like approximately like teddy boys of the Soviet Union, the young generation of the 60s who heard rock and roll music, and they saw photographs and all the stuff and the style, and they became obsessed by rock and roll music. And that was the book about them. And then I started to think about making a movie based on this book. And because before I already shot 2 films, being a student of Architectural Institute. And I heard that those guys were playing just like very simple guitars, acoustic guitars. They fit perfectly into this project. And a couple of years later, 84, exactly the year when Joanna came to Leningrad, I entered Moscow Film School to make this project. And of course, I started to meet all the people from the rock underground, people that I loved for a few years already. The first person who introduced me to Viktor, it was Konstantin Kinchev, because he lived just next to the dormitory of the Moscow Film School. You know, this dom na kurich nожках, they call it. And we became friends with him and started to share some film projects with him. And we decided to shoot the film in Leningrad, the one that you saw yesterday. And it took some time to prepare everything. And one day he called Viktor. By that time, I already knew Grebenshikov, and I organized an underground concert for him at the Moscow Film School. And we decided together with Kinchev what groups we want to see in the film. And he called Viktor and said that I'm talking about Rashid. He's just beside me. He's going to Leningrad tonight, so meet with him. He is our guy, as they used to say. And what he loved to say, voin rock and roll, like rock and roll warrior, like us. Okay, and so the next morning, I find myself in Leningrad. We meet with him. That was the winter of '85, something like that. And he came together with his guitar player, Yuri Kasparyan, and we took a walk from the metro station to the rock club. It was like about 15 minutes walk. And during these 15 minutes, we became friends. Like, I don't know, something happened, some chemistry clicked. And I knew his music. I did know him personally. And I didn't consider him as an actor at the time, because I explained to him that I have this project about these teddy boys in Kazakhstan in the 60s, and I need your music. He said, yes, of course. And while we were walking to this rock club, I understood 15 minutes later that he's absolutely suitable as a lead actor for the film. And when we arrived to rock club, I told him, and I think that you should actually act in the film. And then that was another story, how we became good friends. After that, each time I was in Leningrad, I used to live at his place at Prospect Veteranov. And so we became very close. And he was interested in filmmaking, but he didn't consider himself as an actor. And I convinced him to become a new film star, movie star. That's how we met.
So the first time I guess, saw Viktor, before I met Viktor, was Boris invited me to the rock festival in March of 1985. And by then I'd been there, I guess, four times or something. So, you know, it was the instructions. Some girl will meet you, don't speak English, act Russian, which to my sister and I, who was with me on most trips, meant look down and unhappy as you're walking on the street. And she'll take you in and you'll come backstage and see us, and then you'll see the concert. And again, don't just try to blend in. He's telling this to someone that has her head shaved on the side with like razor marks and blonde hair and dark hair to blend in. But I was sitting in the hall, my sister and I, and the first band played, and it was Zoo Park. And I remember thinking, yeah, that's rock. He reminded me very much of Western rock. He was wearing his mirrored aviator glasses, and the rock blues was like a version of the Stones. I thought it was good. And then the second band came, and the minute the music started, I was just taken by it. And then the light shines on Viktor's face, and just the angles of his face and he always had this habit of turning his head, so this incredible jawline, and he would stand so straight with such just power the way he stood that you would be kind of mesmerized by him. And he started singing, and this deep voice would just grab you. And so I remember I was like, wow, because at this time I was completely mad about Boris, who was my mentor, and I was there to see Boris, but I was really distracted by how amazing Viktor seemed. If you go back to what he was trying to express in his songs, and I see it time and time again with the interviews I did with him, that he keeps saying over and over that I'm writing about the psychological cage we all have inside us and how we can break out of it. So he I think was very aware and in tune of trying to figure out who he was and what he needed. And, in one interview, he's saying, that there are laws in life, and one of the laws is that nighttime is for sleeping. And if you break those laws, there's consequences. So he was very into sleeping at night, as I was. It's my panacea. If you get 8 or 9 hours sleep, I can put up with anything in the day. So I think he just was aware of what he needed to survive. What do you think?
Well, I think that you should understand one important thing. If we compare Vysotsky and Viktor Tsoi, there's two absolutely different worlds. Has nothing in common between them. Vysotsky was a member of the official Soviet culture, society. He was an actor, he worked at Taganka Theater, he made movies and so on. And Viktor and his friends and all this underground community of Leningrad, they were absolutely detached from the Soviet culture. They had nothing to do with it. It was built on, firstly, rock and roll that came from America and Britain, Great Britain, and on famous painters. First, pop art, of course, coming from the United States. Because all those guys, many of them, they were artists, aspiring or accomplished, but they were artists, making pictures and paintings that absolutely in a different style than usually normal Soviet painters would do. It was like they had a word for that in the Soviet Union, bad influence from the West. And they were representatives of this bad influence from the West in their music, in their pictures, painting, in their style, way of life, everything. And they didn't want to be a part of the official culture. That you must understand. And they became popular, firstly, among the people who used to consume this samizdat, tapes, books, and so on, that you cannot find in official stores. It's not distributed, not released in the Soviet Union. And despite that, they became popular among those people, young people. But of course, this underground audience wasn't big enough to become a national idol. And only thanks to perestroika, to Gorbachev, when all of a sudden, starting from approximately 88, even in 87, we knew this word already, but we didn't see much changes around. We wanted those changes, but we didn't see them widespread, just in some places like the Union of Filmmakers in Moscow and so on. And beginning with 88, they get access to nationwide audiences, thanks to film, movie. They made Viktor of his national hero just overnight. And all of a sudden, they were allowed to play in many places. Because before that, they had to play just, in rock club and a couple other places, but nowhere else. And they couldn't make money with their music. They wouldn't be accepted by Philharmonia, how we call it in English, official government bodies who control musicians. They wouldn't be accepted there. And so despite that, they didn't want to, and they didn't want to be part of it. And if you don't accept our way of life, so be it. Okay, we'll stay forever in the underground. And that was approach of Viktor too, because he was independent. And over time, he became the icon of independence, of independent spirit, love for freedom for the young people, millions and millions of young people. No matter what, you be yourself. You stay yourself. Stay for what you believe, like, and I don't know, and the rest is history. I say, and another thing, important thing that makes him different from Vysotsky, he's an Asian-looking guy. He is like very strange. I think that until now, it's even 30 years after his death, he is one and only icon of that scale in the former Soviet Union, who is Asian-looking, what they would call Eurasian hero. The only one. He is accepted like a hero in the Baltic republics, in Central Asia, on the far east of Russia, everywhere. Here they consider him as representative of their own, I don't know, nation, their own culture. He's universal in that respect. And I don't know any other, okay, with such fame and influence on the young people generation. Even 30 years after his death, he's still absolutely popular for new generations that don't know him at all, didn't know him, were not born during his time. Vysotsky cannot be considered as famous as him these days. He was very famous while he was alive. Of course, much more than Viktor himself. Not too many people knew Viktor, and everybody knew Vysotsky, everyone. The people in Gulag and prisons, they would sing his songs and so on. Not Viktor. But now we see that not too many people are talking about Vysotsky. And Viktor is, how they say, he's alive. Viktor Tsoi živ.
Yeah.
So probably that's.
I just want to say, I think Rashid made a great point that I never bring up, but I always think about it. You know, I went there in the beginning of '84, and then when you talk about the history of the Soviet Union, they talk about Gorbachev coming in '85. You didn't feel anything about Gorbachev in '85, and for most of '86. And then Red Wave comes out in June, and at the end of '86, supposedly this is where you hear that it's been lifted, that the rockers can do something. But like Rashid said, really Glasnost didn't really affect everybody's life till '88. And so people think of Gorbachev changing things in '85. You didn't even think about him. It was just the new leader, you know, so it really wasn't until much later.
The new leader after 2 years of quick turnover of.
Right. The other thing, because Sasha Tsoi couldn't be here today, I thought to myself, who better to talk about Viktor than Viktor. So I had been working on my book in 1988, found this interview of Viktor that I hadn't seen for 30 years, and I just emailed myself a couple of things that I thought you guys might be interested. You'd be interested in the whole thing, but I wanted. But I'm going to read one of them. I think I have 3 of them that over time I'll read you guys. So the first one is I asked Viktor, what are the main themes in your group of Kroivy lyrics? So this is June of '88. He's a huge star, group of Kroivys, like there's Kino Mania going on. And he said, this album is very heroic and very romantic. But the main idea in all the songs is the person. If you're a human, you have to do something. I don't know what, but just do. Not only live your life, but do something. Just break anything. Just break any jail inside you. Difficult to explain. And he's trying to find the words, and I'm saying, say it in Russian. And he says, it's not because my English is not well. I cannot answer this question in Russian too. Everything I mean is inside the album. And if I can explain it in a couple of words, then I don't need to record all this album. So there you go.
I'm going to start using that when people ask me why I'm writing a whole book.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I really do I'm fascinated in this sort of pivotal moment of 1988. But before we get there, Rashid, you brought up Victor's Eurasian roots, right? He's half Korean, half Russian.
Yeah.
I think about a lot of the discussions that are going on in Soviet history and post-Soviet history and Slavic studies today, and these questions of race and ethnicity and national identity and personal identity in the Soviet Union. I mean, what was that like for Victor, that experience, or was it just like, no big deal within the Leningrad scene?
I'll let Rashid answer what he thinks, but I always felt that Victor felt a little bit like an outsider. There was something a little bit different about Victor, and I could tell that he felt it. And then Rashid was telling me earlier about when he was younger in school. He was the only...
In school, he was born in Leningrad, dominantly Slavic-looking people. And when he was at school, he was the only one looking like an Asian. And he was bullied for that, they were like bullied. And they was mocked by his classmates, and they would call him the Japanese for his looks. And I think that I didn't speak much about it with Victor, just a bit of it, because we didn't really care about it. But I'm sure that from those early days at school, he became a little bit, strangled, how we say that, from estranged from the normal society around him, preferring to have some few friends, but close friends, and sharing his thoughts, dreams, everything with them only, not with the wider audience. And in Leningrad, Viktor Tsoi, we know him very well. We know how open he was, how caring he was, and so on. But for many people in Leningrad in those days, he was, how we would call it in English, заносчивый. Means like not accessible, or snobby.
Standoffish?
It's like closed, not talking to people, like, just keep them silent with them and so on. And many didn't consider him the hero, actually. It was that, like, he's doing some music that we heard a million times, from other groups, like from Cure, from the Smiths and so on. So what's new? Nothing new in that. And he had actually a quite close circle of friends. With not too many friends would be his close friends. He knew many, but he wasn't close to many. And I think this comes from his early days at school. For example, when he came to Almaty to shoot the needle, that was the first time that he came to Almaty. Before, his father is from Kazakhstan, from other city, Kızıldağ, a very uncomfortable city. And he used to come there when he was a teenager several times, but didn't have a lot of good memories of that time. And when he came to Almaty, he loved it because all of a sudden he saw many people around him with the same slanted eyes, the Asian looks and so on. And they didn't care about it at all. They wouldn't make jokes on him and so on. So he was like everyone else around him. And of course, a lot of Russians and Slavic looking people. This was a great mixture of different ethnic groups and so on in Kazakhstan, over 100 of them. And he felt comfortable. And when, after Sundance, they went together with Joanna to Japan, you can tell about it.
Elation, landing in Japan, and the whole time we're in Japan, I could just feel how happy he was to have every single face he saw staring back at him look similar to him. It really was amazing and palpable. I just remember thinking, oh my gosh. And there's these photos of us, because the big manager there gave us a party at his house, and there's about 50 or 60 of us all smushed together. And if I wasn't there right next to Victor, you would never find Victor. You'd be like, where's Victor? Because he just looked like everybody in the photo.
Right.
Yeah, it really showed how important it is. You know, this is the whole thing about people here saying representation on TV. I saw it from my own eyes, how important it is to have people looking back at you that look like you. Yeah.
And at some point in 87, he started to hate Leningrad, his native city. And as his former friends would say, he was like offended by Leningrad. He didn't want to live there anymore. And he moved to Moscow, to live in Moscow. There he felt a little bit more comfortable. There. It's not so many people knew him as they did in Leningrad. And he was constantly, always feeling not comfortable with his fame, with the attention of the people. And in his last months of life, when we were sitting in his wife's apartment, I mean, Natasha, very great days. He loved summer, it was winter and so on. He was depressed. And he said one thing: I don't walk in the streets anymore, and I don't want to go out, because some crazy guy could approach me and hit me in the face. That's his words, not mine. That's how he considered his fame. He was very, very, in the beginning, ironical about the fame, his fame, and then it became as a burden for him. He couldn't stand it, you know. So I would say he was a simple guy. He wasn't introverted guy, you know. He hated to stay alone. For example, when we were shooting The Needle, he had his own, of course, room in a hotel, comfortable hotel in the center of the city, but he didn't spend one night there. He always lived at my place because he hated to stay alone. So this is very interesting. On one side, he wouldn't accept too many people to be his friends and to be open to them. On the other hand, he hated to be alone. That's his character. Mm-hmm. And when I see his photographs from Japan, and each and every photograph, he's happy. He's like shining, yes, with light. I don't know. And we understood that new life was coming, because I met those people from the Amuse Corporation in Park City. Kiki Miyake introduced them because she was a representative of them in New York. And they visited our screening, and we had a huge, huge party in our house there in Park City. And we already had a deal with Ed Pressman, American producer, to make an American film, with me writing and directing it, and Viktor playing the lead role in it. And Tony Safford, who the director of Sundance Film Festival, who that year he moved to be vice president of New Line Pictures. They also would get together to finance this project, and the Japanese said we also put our money into it, because for those two, as they say in the facts, the biggest talents from the Soviet Union, Viktor and myself, and they invited him, himself and myself, to Japan, but I couldn't come because I was writing the screenplay with William Gibson in Seattle. And I asked him, why are you so attracted by Viktor? With the guy, the manager of this Amuse Corporation. And he said, you must understand, he looks like us. That's what he said. He's like us. And they offered the money for the film and for his tour in Asia with the Japanese rock group. No, but the rest, and I suggest that you go to Japan instead of me because
To get me to Kazakhstan, because in the film that you will all see today, I personally was so taken by the desert scene where it's all dry and you can see all the crevices because there hasn't been water there for however long. And it moved in me the same thing that drew me to the musicians. The first song I ever heard of Boris's, the songs I heard of Kino. What I really found intriguing was that I would be listening to the songs and I didn't know the lyrics. You have to remember, I didn't know Russian, but I would listen to the songs and I would feel like, oh, this is so sad. Oh, it's so hopeless. Oh, no, this is like cheerful. Oh, this is like, so it was always this, what I really found in Russia is these mixed emotions of good and bad, of dark and light, of happiness and sadness that moved me. And when I was watching Igla, I just, to this day, every time I see the scene of that dry desert and then that boat there, it just touched something deep inside my soul. And I said to him, I'm going to shoot a music video and I have to shoot in the deserts of Almaty. And he set it up that his brother shot me. And of course, I only went for 24 hours, so I couldn't go to where that great desert was with Viktor. But they put me on some Polish or Czechoslovakian motorcycle driving across the desert in Almaty. So anyway, we became friends then. And then at some point when we were going to Sundance, Viktor and I started calling Rashid Mamuchka because Rashid was just level-headed. He was very calm and would organize, okay, you guys are gonna come here and do this. So that became our thing. Right. And we haven't, since this trip, we haven't seen each other in 31 years. So you guys brought us together and it's like we haven't seen each other for a month. It's so weird.
But we stayed in touch all those
Yes,
years.
yes, we stay in touch, but in
exchanging
person.
emails
Yeah,
and messages.
yeah.
And do you still call him Mamuchka?
I did. When I saw him, I gave him a big hug and I said, Mamuchka.
Maybe it's time to call me Babushka.
Yeah. Or Babushka and Dejushka. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so 1988, there's this turning point with Igla, with the needle. And it sounds like almost overnight, Viktor becomes this massive celebrity.
But Igla wasn't released until 89.
Right, sorry.
Well, yeah. So,
I think the change, and I think everybody will agree, what changed in a night was the closing scene of the film Asa. That changed everything for Viktor from one night to the next. That scene, I can't remember any other part of the movie. It's the only part I remember. So to me, that was the changing point.
Right. This scene wasn't in the original screenplay, and but when Solovyov saw Yaha, he decided to introduce Viktor Tsoi at the end of the film, the same as in Yaha. And they have chosen his new song, Changes, in the film. And of course, this scene made Viktor famous. Film was released in 88, the time when we finished The Needle. They could actually go to theaters like 1 month later after Asa, but it wasn't until 89. But Solovyov, he was well-established, renowned Soviet filmmaker. He made a lot of movies based on Russian classics and stuff. So this film had no problems with distribution. But we started to show the film ourselves, because in the Soviet Union, you had the right, for any director, film director, had his own copy, and who would go to any places to show the film, even without the permission, the distribution permission, as they call it, for personal presentation, speaking with the audience and so on. And I started receiving calls, just like 2-3 days after the film was sent to Moscow, to Goskino, inviting me to show my own director's copy to the public for everywhere in the Soviet Union. And I just started to go there and show the films. And I saw what you call kinomania, so many. It's the crowds of young people who couldn't get into the theaters. They would try to do anything to get in and see the film, because they would think that the film would be never released. It's the only chance to see it. And most of them, they didn't see Viktor, and they saw him in Assa, released just months ago and so on. And they wanted to see him in the leading role, the entire film. Because in Assa, as Viktor himself says, I am in this film as вставной зуб, how we call it. As
Afterthought? I don't know.
he says, I am for the Assa, my role in the Assa is being вставной зуб. It's like an implant.
Like an addition or something.
Like a dental implant or something, because the film didn't need me, my presence.
Right.
But yes, he was, for the first time, he was shown to the wide audience, Soviet audience, and became very popular. So once I remember in Sverdlovsk, which is Yekaterinburg these days, we were showing the film there, sitting in the office, and suddenly one of the managers come in, and she says, listen, there's something, they are breaking the doors of the theater, and they will destroy the theater. What should we do? And it's late at night, it was after dark. We don't know what to do. Should we cancel it? The screening? I said, you're crazy. If you cancel it, so that's when they really destroy your theater. So what should we do? You just go to them outside and tell them that we'll show this film for everyone. Just come 1.5 hours later, you will have additional screening. This is the only way to stop this madness. And they did so, and the crowd, said, okay, we'll return, but show us the film, if not. And the other manager also comes in and says, listen, the young boys, teenagers, they're trying to get into the theater through the, how you call it, ventilation, ducts. What to do? And again, they don't know, because they could be killed there, because there's, something rotating there, turning. We don't know what to do. What we should call the police? I said, you should turn off the ventilator. That's it. And let them in. Let them sit somewhere, under the wall and watch the movie. What's the problem? You are already making a lot of money from those screenings, because the theater is crowded, and we have 2, 3, 4 more screenings. It's okay, it's fine with me. It's all right. And you would screen the film for a few days. And this is just a little example. And it really was crazy about all this stuff, the new kind of movies that they never saw. And at the same time, a lot of articles started to appear in the Soviet press. Most of them, all of them, they were positive. Film critics, distinguished film critics, Soviet critics, suddenly started to speak about new phenomenon from Kazakhstan of filmmaking. Absolutely nothing to do with Eisenstein or Soviet socialist realism and so on. This is absolutely new. And not too many examples from abroad also, as much as something, I don't know how to consider it. Is it just amateurish pranks or something, or it's a deep cinema? I don't know. They didn't know how to do. And many Russian film critics started to support this new direction of filmmaking. And all of a sudden, they, like in January of 1989, they decided to release the film with the highest possible number of copies, prints of the film, which we didn't expect that ourselves, because Viktor was absolutely certain that this film will be banned. And we were preparing to distribute it through this Samizdat network for the same young people everywhere in the Soviet Union. In every more or less big city, we would have our people who would copy audio tapes with new albums of Aquarium, Kino, and so on. And today you record your new album, and a few days later, everyone in the Soviet Union listens to it through this copying. And at that time, VHS came. So you could have comparatively cheap video recorder in your apartment. You could watch movies, all the American band movies, pirated movies. And through the same chain, we would distribute our film. That's what we decided to do. We don't care about if Goskino would try to stop it or not. You cannot stop Samizdat. You know, it exists for like since the 50s. And that was a shock for us. And we were invited for the first time when we had official screening of The Needle was in September of '88 in Odessa at the festival Golden Duke. And we won a prize there. And since then, there's too many press about it, too many articles about the film. And so they decided to allow to release the film. But one thing, what happened in '88, glasnost came, means openness. Not so much perestroika in the political terms, but glasnost. It's the glasnost that effectively killed the Soviet Union. Because all the media started to publish everything they wanted, and nobody could stop it. And it wasn't allowed to stop it. And many journalists and people and politicians, they started to express themselves. So they couldn't do it even a few months before. They started to express it, and a lot of articles criticizing some people from the government, a lot of them. And if before glasnost came, it was very dangerous for them to allow something. If you allow something, so you can be expelled from the Communist Party, you'll have some punishment and so on. And all of a sudden, it's turned upside down. It became very dangerous to forbid something because you will be criticized in the press and you will lose your job and you will lose your party membership. And it happened. We were lucky, that the chairman of this committee at Goskino that would accept films for distribution and would authorize its release was the elder brother of Natasha, Viktor Tsoi's new wife, and my professor at Moscow Film School, who loved my work and who supported Kirill Razlogov. He died a few months ago. And he was the chairman of this committee. He became the chairman of this committee in '88. And he insisted that the film must be released to the wide audience. And no one in this committee, not like a few months before it would happen, no one would be against it because it became dangerous. Okay, we're not against.
It's nice.
Didn't mean that they liked the film or loved the film. They maybe hated it, but the new generation of film goers, they needed something new, and so they accepted it. And we went to the top of the box office and beating many other releases, even American releases, and so. And Ed Pressman would joke also. He loved to joke. Whenever I come into his office, he said, wait, listen, this guy, just came in, he's more popular, his film is more popular than E.T. in Russia. So that's how it happened, yeah.
Would you guys like to hear what Viktor said about Igla? So I asked him in June of '88, so he said the first screening was September of '88.
Okay.
So the first thing I asked Victor, which I don't have written here, but then I'll read the second one, was why did you decide to act in a film? And he took a huge puff on his cigar where he'd suck in all of his cheeks and look very funny. And he sucked in his cigarette, and he let it out and he thought, and he said, I acted in a film because it was interesting. Everything that's interesting to me, I do. And then he said, you know, the films here are the films of our fathers. They're not for young people. And he said, I don't know if I'm good enough to do it. And this is so Victor. He's so famous by June '88. And he's basically saying, he also says, I don't know if the film is good enough. I don't know if I'm good enough, but nobody else is doing it, so I'm going to try. So a couple questions later, I asked him, why do you think it's important that you did the film? And Victor replies, here in cinema, there is no real hero, no hero like Superman, not like a real person in real life, but a hero like the God who can do everything, fly the streets, fight everybody. Young people here do need it. And maybe I'm not good enough to do a hero, but if there's nothing, I want to begin it. I want young people to have their own heroes. They look to the West heroes, Arnold Schwarzenegger or Bruce Lee or Sylvester Stallone, but it's not their heroes. It's American heroes. And for sure, it will be better if it's their own heroes.
Yeah. And not surprisingly, the year after, in '90, at the beginning of '90, they published the poll. They would make it every year. The Soviet Screen, the most popular magazine about cinema in the Soviet Union, and each year they elect the best actor of the year. Like dozens of thousands of people vote, and so. And in the first issue of 1990, Viktor was declared best actor of the Soviet Union. And the second one, it was very far from him, as the professional actor Alexander Abdulov. So we opened the so-called Kazakh New Wave with this film. Like yesterday I was speaking about two of my favorite directors, but I didn't mention the third one, which greatly influenced the needle. Is recently deceased Jean-Luc Godard with his French New Wave. And that's it. And Victor, by the way, also loved his film, Breathless. Yeah. Okay.
I love this. I mean, that's just such an incredible quote from Victor about, you know, they have Bruce Lee, but those are Western heroes. They need their own hero, and maybe it's not me, but at least I can get it started. And so I want to leave lots of time for questions, but so I'll end with this, you know, thinking, fast forwarding 32 years after Victor's death, and we see how his music and his persona has been used in protests across Russia. I think especially about the 2020 election in Belarus and the protesters' use of Перемен in those. And Rashid, you talked about, it was, you know, he was in Leningrad, he was in Moscow, he went to Kazakhstan and he felt this special connection. He went to Japan and they said, oh, we see someone who looks like us. What do you make of this sort of lasting influence of Tsoi and our desires to claim him as one of our own here at the University of Rochester today?
You know, I think this is a question with no answer. And I think all you academics here are so incredible that you spend time learning about Victor and being moved by what he did and trying to figure out. But you're on a road that never has an answer, which I guess is good.
We're rolling the boulder up the hill.
Because, you know, what has happened to Victor and who he was and his voice and his lyrics and his music is something that can't be explained because nobody can predict it really. I mean, you can predict someone has talent, but to go to the extremes of how influential Victor is now, I think it just has to happen, and there's not any clear answer to it. I had started to say 4 or 5 years ago, when I was in Russia doing my presentations, that I felt in the world, starting about 4 or 5 years ago, that I think many people all over the world feel like something's not enough. There's something missing in our lives right now, and many of us have good houses and plenty of money and cars, but there's something lacking. And I see this to many countries I go to, and there's something of that void that we feel that Viktor and his music and who he was can fill up a little. It somehow brings us back to something we need to feel about the simplicity of what life means. But it's very much magic. You know, it's hard to explain it in words. You know, in terms, I've been asked many times, what do I think, how do I think Viktor would feel about his song Changes being sung in protest songs? And in the beginning, I would say, I don't know that he would be happy because he didn't write them as protest songs. I even asked him all the time about that. But then when I was really looking back at his answers, and even the answer I told earlier, is that he wanted his lyrics to motivate people to do whatever they needed to do. So in essence, if hearing his song Perimen motivates them to go protest and sing his song, even though maybe he didn't write it as a protest song, or he would go and use it as a protest song, I think he would be proud that it got people out of their chairs and got people to go and to do something. And, you know, we all know that songs sometimes take on a life of their own. And Perimen definitely did that. I think a couple of us were talking this morning about the fact that when people become so attached to something, music, that becomes so important to them, they almost feel like they own it. So it's almost like a lot of Viktor's songs aren't even Viktor's anymore. They become so part of everybody else, and they feel like it's part of their life. So they have some ownership in it, which, you know, has difficulties of its own sometimes because of how it's used or where it's used without permission. You know, that's a whole nother discussion. But anyway, that's my thoughts.
I think that part of this magic is that he's no longer there with us. And you can fantasize whatever you want. And you can use it. Politicians can use it. Some activists can use his heritage and bend it as they like. And he cannot complain because he's not there. You can make a hero from the imaginary, fantasized Viktor. That's part of the magic, certainly. But this magic cannot happen to anyone who dies. No. He was certainly special. What was that? I spoke with Viktor a lot of times, days and nights and stuff. And among other things, we were talking about music a lot, movies and music. And when we were discussing his music, he repeated several times one thing, which was different from Grebenshikov, Aquarium, and so on. He says, I want to write and sing music songs that everyone in the street can play and sing. So it goes directly to the language of the streets. As I remember one poem by Mayakovsky. I don't remember all the lines, but there was one line said that he is given the language to the streets. Улица корчится без языка, meaning that the streets are suffering without their own language, and I am giving them their language, the language of the streets. And Viktor Tsoi, better than anyone else, than even Mike Naumenko, who was also approximately the same, he was singing about everyday life. He gave this language to the streets, to the younger generation. What they do with it, it's another thing. Of course, you're absolutely right. When Viktor wrote Changes, He didn't think about politics, about changes in the political regime and the Soviet Union and so on. He wasn't a protester. His protest was not participating in all this bullshit around. When he was asked, what do you like around you in this life? Can you tell us? It's good, it's fixed on video. He says, nothing. What do you like in this life? Nothing. You see, he's not against it. He just doesn't, he doesn't like it. And he's offering what he likes. It's in his songs. It's in his, I don't know, actions. What is he doing is, he understood it very, very well, that too many people look at him. And he is not allowed to do some bad stuff. He wasn't a junkie at all. He never accepted any drugs. No. Unlike so many of people now that are talking about, oh, he was a junkie, he was... No, not at all. He wasn't an alcoholic, no. And he was very, very focused. To create something was his aim in life, to create. This is the biggest passion in his life. And he was a great painter. He was not only a musician. You should know that he was a great, great painter. Recently we had several exhibitions of his paintings. He was a great actor, and he, of course he would continue, because the same year when he died, in 90, this fall, we already were starting pre-production of our new project. He just died a few days before. He never made it to Moscow. He was thinking about writing screenplays. We have several, written drafts of, yes, some synopses of his projects that he wanted to probably direct himself also. So he loves movies. So he was, I know, a multi-talented person. Very, very skeptical about his own abilities, as you said. But I know, being myself a kind of creator, architect, filmmaker, and so on, and I wrote poetry too. I know, in most of my friends, they're creators. And I know that most of them, they hate what they're doing. They hate the results. And they want to do it better and better and better. It's never perfect. And we want to be perfect, but it's unreachable. You cannot be perfect. Nothing is perfect. And Viktor understood that. He wasn't, happy with everything what he was doing. He wanted to change it, including the arrangements of his songs within the group Kino. Same as John Lennon hated many, many songs of Beatles because they weren't played correctly. We should have made it differently. Same with him. It's not that they would do it better than this. No. We could make it even worse. But it's just the imminent quality of a real creator, to be always dissatisfied. That's why you're moving on and on and on. You continue to work. If you make something perfect, that's the end, finished. We are not made perfect. If we believe in God and the creation of God, we are not perfect. And unlike the angels who are perfect, we have the choice and we have the ability to evolve ourselves. The same with Viktor. So he was moving on and on and on. And that's why many friends of his early days stayed behind and were even offended by him because he forgot about us. He no longer calls us. He no longer talks to us, He's somewhere. But Viktor said, I have to move on. He started as a punk rocker with Panov, Свинья, in his group Automatic Satisfiers. Автоматические удовлетворители. It's like close to British punk rock. And he changed, and he moved on to a post-punk, to new romantics, and so on. And many people stayed there, and in old rock and roll. And he became increasingly uncomfortable with all this guys in Leningrad. That's why he hated actually Leningrad in '87 and stopped going there. So moving on. That's his character. Sometimes I'm 8 years older than him, but at times I would find myself like younger than him. It was much more serious than I was at the time.
I think what Rashid said was interesting, that yes, part of it is that Viktor died young. And I think if you look at the legacy of Boris Grebenshkov, who is the father of underground Russian rock and roll, you know, he has a huge place in history, but he's lived long enough that he's gotten older, he's gotten heavier, he's made mistakes, he's made albums people don't like, it's up and down. And I remember a year ago when I was talking to Yuri for my Viktor Tsoi book, and we had never talked about Viktor's death ever, and we were talking about it and just how great he was. And I said, you know, it's just so sad. And then Yuri said, but you know, Viktor's lucky, because Viktor will always be young, Viktor will always be talented, always be beautiful, and he'll always be perfect. And that's true.
Viktor said once, it was in '86. We were sitting in his apartment with his first wife, Mariana, until early morning, late night, whatever you call it. And at some point, he said one thing that I would never forget, and it was published actually in the book of memories about Viktor. He said that if Boris Grebenshkov would die today, he would become a legend. That's his words,
So
Viktor.
yeah.
You know, of course, he didn't think about dying. You know, this was an accident, car accident, and he was full of life and everything. But so many people think that he saw his coming death, and he expressed it in his songs. If you can find some lines about this, who die young, and so on. It's not that he predicted or saw his death. He would imagine that, but he felt it. I don't know, somehow he managed to feel.
You know, I went this last June to the Baltics, and I had been to Estonia, but not to Latvia, and I went and saw there's some guys that their hobby is to make these memorials to everywhere Tsoi was right before he died. They built the great statue where his car crash was. And I can say, after seeing where he stayed for 4 summers at the house, and behind the house, you go up this hill, the beautiful trees on this path, and you go down, and there's this sea that's kind of hidden. So there's nobody there, with this very shallow, very far out that you could walk. And it's like hidden, nobody's there. That's where he was every summer. And where he went fishing on this kind of pond was so serene and beautiful. What I know for sure after visiting all of that is that he was so happy the day he died. He was so happy. He was in a place where people weren't around him. He was with Natasha, who he loved. He had his son there, who he loved. Yuri had just left the night before, that they were ready for their next album. Yeah. Everything was good. And the minute we pulled over to where the car accident was, on this 2-way highway, and we're walking to where the memorials, this huge truck comes barreling past us. And it was the scariest thing ever. I don't know how they didn't crash, because they are going so fast. And then there's this turn with these trees over it, so it's dark. I mean, it's such a precarious corner. I was amazed, because then we saw cars also looking like they were going to get out of control in another truck. And the guys that took us there said there's never been an accident since Viktor died, but they've never done anything to secure this turn.
And it's narrow.
Yeah, so yes, even though maybe he had felt something, certainly I think he was in a really happy place. that on the day that he died.
I think this is maybe the perfect place to open this up to questions from everyone in the room, but also folks who are on Zoom. You can use the raise hand function on Zoom, and you can also just put your question in the chat. And if we could have our fearless assistant, Petya, to help pass the microphone around, I'll give you mine. Do you have a question? Do you want to ask the first question? Yeah.
Obviously, I'm a huge fan of Viktor Tsoi and all of his work, but nowadays, after 32 years of his legacy, that he has died, yet we see this comparison with him and some of his contemporary rockers, that he is so much more famous, although he is dead. Like we see other films featuring rock stars like Машина времени, like Kincho from Alisa. Would you say that the reason why Viktor Tsoi is still so famous and so well regarded in all the post-Soviet countries is distinctly because of his unfittedness in school, in society, that he was part of everything, yet not a part of one thing? He looked like an Asian. He shared the looks with Kazakh, with Japanese, with the Eastern, the Asian country people, yet he spoke Russian. He had this soul that was Soviet. He worked for the Soviet Union and he died a Soviet citizen. Would you say this is the reason that he has stayed popular, stayed so almost like a godlike figure for rock music fans and people around the whole former Soviet bloc?
I mean, I think so. I think, Viktor was a reflection of all of us, because I think all of us feel less than about something in our lives, no matter how smart we are or how much money you have or whatever. There's all of us question, who are we? And we even question sometimes, are we doing things for the right reason? Or am I doing it because I want something out of it? So I think he touched a nerve there, but I think it's just an easy example to think of the band last night playing. Every time a Kino song starts, you just get a wave of happiness, like it's an old friend. There's just something about his music that touches people in their soul. Somehow we're all connected to him.
Yeah. And Viktor didn't make any mistakes. He just didn't have enough time to make mistakes. No. He is like considered by many an Asian guy singing American rock in Russian language, something strange. That's impossible. And he became a hero because he wasn't attached to any group of people, certain group of people. He was for everyone. You can find whoever you are, no matter your ethnicity, your religion, your beliefs, and so on. You can find something in Viktor, and you can relate to it. There's something that every one of us can relate to. It's like we can imagine that Viktor is a better version of ourselves. We made a lot of mistakes. There's something that we are ashamed for and so on, but not Viktor. He's like, and that's why we are listening to his songs again and again and again. New generations come and they listen to his songs. Simple lyrics. At the same time, they are not stupid. They have a lot of levels under them. Even when they singing about light in the kitchen that you turn on and turn off. And you understand there's something under it, there's a universe under it. So he's a role model for too many young people from different former Soviet republics. and he managed to do it. So, talent and integrity, I mean, is the key.
Katya Hilkiewicz writes, "Hi everyone, I'm from Ukraine and I'm really happy that I can be part of this conference. I love Kino's songs and you are geniuses, Joanna and Rashid. I worship your talents." So my question, what feelings did you have when Viktor spoke to you? I mean his energy. What was it like? I believe his strength was really tangible. Thank you.
You know, when Victor was your friend, you felt it. And so it was comfortable and it just flowed easily. You know, I felt the feeling of goodness. When you were his friend and talked to you, you didn't feel the huge talent and that he was some magic in the universe. He just felt like a really good friend that made you feel good. You know, it was very simplistic. It was just, I don't know what to say except for easy. He just was such a good friend. And that kind of friend is the hardest type to lose, because that's the strength you get from those kind of friends that make you feel confident in your life and help you to be able to do things. And, you know, I still have Victor in my head and he still influences it. When I saw his statue where he crashed, I was starting to get sad and get tearful. And his statue started talking to me saying, "I'm where I'm supposed to be. This is okay. The sun is on me. I'm looking left." You know, he was just, even in his death, he just makes my life better.
Thank you so much to you both for sharing all of this with us. It's really special. I mean, it's a once in a lifetime chance to hear from both of you, and it's absolutely fascinating. I was hoping to ask about gender, to change the topic a little bit. We think of this time of perestroika and glasnost as being this time of more fluid gender boundaries and expanding possibilities. You know, this is the time of Marinka Rivera, who had this wonderful, you know, hairstyle, which reminds me a bit of yours at the time, Joanna. And we see also in this milieu of Tsoi, this greater kind of androgyny. You know, in Yaha, as we saw last night, the style with the one dangling earring, we know Tsoi wearing eyeliner, and there was just much more, it seems to me, fluidity in the style of the time. And yet, you know, in the photos and videos that we've seen, it is, of course, still quite a male milieu. And Joanna, you were often the only woman hanging with all these dudes.
Kid in a candy store.
Yeah, I mean, I think most of us here envy you. But yeah, I was wondering if one or both of you could talk a bit about, the place of women in this world, in Tsoi's world, both, you know, as wives and girlfriends behind the scenes and also as creators in their own right, and, you know, what kind of relationships you had with them.
You know, one of the things I found fascinating in Russia in general, I was always comparing everything to America, and many times I found them on two extremes, but one of them was the men seem much more comfortable among each other. You know, men walk on the streets holding the hand of their 15-year-old son. Men kiss each other goodbye on the lips. And so because it was so much more just not these barriers like Americans have that men are supposed to, if a man said goodbye to another man and kissed him on the lips, you would immediately in America think they must be gay. And it wasn't like that then. And because it wasn't like that, I even asked Yuri about a year ago, did you know in the 80s that Tabor and Gustav were gay? I had no idea, even though Gustav's wearing wife-beater t-shirts in the concerts. But I really didn't see the difference there. It was much more blurred, that people were just comfortable with who they were and interacting and hugging people however they wanted to express themselves. So I found that to be really delightful there. I asked Boris in my first interview if there were women in rock, and he said, unfortunately, we're a little old-fashioned here and there isn't. And, I had a great life. The first year and a half, every night it was me sitting at a table with Boris and Sergei Korokin and I and Alex Kahn, who was there too. There was rarely ever women around, except for they would get tea or they would be at the parties. And then, later with Kino. So for me, I was having a blast. Who wouldn't want to have my life that I was doing? But yes, it was the only one I ever knew about was Zhana Arguzarova, who was in Moscow. So we didn't see her much. She wasn't part of the rock club. There really were no women. In fact, you never saw the wives until there was a party. And what was unusual about Viktor's marriage to Mariana is that they were more like equals. He very much trusted Mariana, and she kind of was, before they became official and had real managers, she was kind of the manager. So Mariana was around. I saw her more than any other wife. And the way that they interacted together seemed almost that they had this dual respect for each other. And he certainly trusted her. In fact, it was after he left Mariana and they had one official manager in Leningrad and then later on that Eisenspitz, that I had no proof of this ever, but I knew that the Kino guys didn't know anything about business and didn't want to know anything about business. So when Mariana was out of the picture, I was sure that everybody else was taking advantage of Kino, that they were taking money, because none of them, not even Viktor, cared about the business side of it and checking who was taking what percentage and everything. So. Yeah. But even though the women weren't around, I will say I was in awe in general about Russian women, because coming from America, where women still, it wasn't an obvious that all women work the way they do today. In the 80s, still many women did not work. So going to Russia to see every woman working because they had to work under communism was interesting. But even though they worked 8 hours a day, they still had to do all the things that the American women had to do. They had to do all the shopping, which we all know how long the lines are in Russia. They had to carry all of that to take the bus, to the tram, to get off, walk a mile to their house. And then they had to prepare the meal for everybody, take care of the kids and take care of the house. So Russian women, even though I wasn't around them all that often, when I later moved to Moscow in the 90s, I ended up seeing, they're like superheroes. The Russian women are amazing.
Yeah.
Hello. So what do you think of the contemporary representation of Leningrad rock and Viktor Tsoi in particular, in like such movies as Leto by Kirill Serebrennikov, or the ones that came out later, or the ones that came out earlier, but like in the 2010s maybe?
I have an opinion. Do you want to talk first, Rashid?
About today's?
Well, so Leta, I saw Leta, and I have two different opinions on it. And my first opinion, I thought it was a fabulous movie. I thought it was great. I thought the production and the direction was amazing. It reminded me of Almost Famous, if you guys remember that. So it was kind of like an artsy independent film. I thought all the little quirks that were in the film, one of my favorite scenes of any film ever is the bus scene with the typical old normal Russians that start singing The Passenger, Iggy Pop's The Passenger. I love that. I love the narrator that keeps popping his head in front of the camera throughout the film, that there's a rock club concert and they're sitting nicely and then they all get crazy and jumping all over and it's this mayhem, and then he says, never happened. I mean, I just thought there were some great artistic moments in it. The issues I had with the film were two things. First of all, I had a problem with the actor who played Viktor because he didn't have any of the energy or the essence of Viktor. And for me, it was very difficult. You know, Viktor was one of those people in life. There's some people among us that walk like they're walking an inch off the ground. Baryshnikov was like that. Bruce Lee was like that. They just seem very light. And that actor wasn't like that. The other thing about Viktor was because he was only half Asian, you know, many Asians have a wider face, and Viktor had a very narrow, angular face. So he had a very special look about him that was very, you know, enticing to everybody, and the actor didn't. And so the actor just didn't capture it for me, so I had a little bit of difficulty with that. But the bigger problem with the film for me is that I understand when you're making a film based on real life, that it's not a docudrama, that it's a film and you take liberties and you bend the lines. But I think it's very dangerous when you bend the lines to where it changes the facts. And the problem about Letta is when you see Letta, after it, you think that Mike Naumenko is the one that mentored Viktor and brought him to the rock club, and it was Boris. So the film actually took part of Boris's legacy away from him. And I know Boris had read the script before it was made and was very unhappy, and I could understand why. Because that is Boris's legacy. I have it in this 88 interview, how he says, Boris heard him play a couple songs and said, I like your songs, I want to produce you. And Viktor says, I was 19, I knew nothing. Boris was 26, and he and some of the other aquarium guys took me in the studio and produced me. I mean, it's documented that it was Boris that did it. But overall, I thought it was a great film. I loved it. And then the other one, Tsoi. I didn't see it. I refused to see it. So I align myself always with Natasha, Viktor's widow, and with Sasha Tsoi, because I trust and respect their opinion. So when they say, this isn't good, don't go near it, I don't go near it. I did get the script for Tsoi, and I just thought, why? There were things made up in the script to try to cause conflict that wasn't in true real. And it causes such pain and grief to people that are already grieving because they lost him, that I just thought it was very irresponsible of him to make that film.
I agree. Yes, you said perfectly about both of those films. I can tell a little about different thing, that I'm receiving offers and proposals to make a film about Viktor, biopic, but with actor acting as Viktor Tsoi. I've been receiving this for years and years, and I always say no. Why? Not because Viktor does not deserve his own biopic, but it would go against our principles of work together with Viktor, of our collaboration with Viktor, because my style, which convinced him to star in my movies, was never using actors pretending of being someone else, using new faces, non-professional actors, interesting people, acting in his films, not as actors, but as themselves. And I think that the biggest maybe condition of the Viktor's success in this film that you will see today is that he's not acting there. He's not acting himself as if he was just being in front of the camera himself. That's it. No acting at all. That was important. Now, can you imagine if I cast someone as Viktor Tsoi in a film about him, who is pretending to be Viktor, the guy who I knew, I don't know, as myself almost for 5 years. I know his every movement, his I don't know, every word, his every intonation, how he would react to this or that and so on. And I would go crazy the next day of the shooting. It will be a nervous breakdown. I could never do it. And it would go against our principle of being yourself. That's, and from that point of view, yes, I can see that in this film, Letter, it's not Viktor at all. That's nothing to do with Viktor. It's just like, how you call it, simulacrum. And yeah, it's just simulation of Viktor. But the director himself, Serebrennikov, when I saw the film, I was afraid that Boris Grebenshikov was right, and this film is very bad. And I didn't expect much, and actually I liked it. Why? Not because Viktor was Viktor, this actor, but the film director tried to express his love to the times and the people whom he never knew. He was in Leningrad in the 80s. He didn't know any one of those characters in his film, but he loved them, and he expressed his love. And I am grateful to him that he didn't spoil the picture. Yeah. Yes, we can argue about was there any romantic relationship between Viktor and the wife of Mike Naumenko. Yeah, it's questionable. But she herself gave an interview that was something about, I don't know. It's not the point. Okay, it could be so, could be that. As soon as we accept that this is an imaginary world, happens somewhere in parallel galaxy, it's okay, it's fine. It wasn't disgusting. It wasn't like putting shame on Viktor or Mike or anyone else or Grebenshikov himself. Right. It has nothing to do with the early interview of Grebenshikov when he said that they just painted us as sexual perverts or something. You remember, that's very, very tough interview. I thought, well, it's not possible. What is it? And I was relaxed when I saw the film. It was a good film, nice film, as it is. It's nothing to do with the real Viktor or real Mike, but well done, good. I was enjoying the film. He actually managed to catch the part of the spirit of those times. It is there. I can sense it. We can, of course, argue that there were only one window instead of two in Mike's apartment. It was narrow. You couldn't put his bed, from one wall to another because it was just like less than 2 meters between. It was always, along the wall, not like in the middle of the room. Mm-hmm. Okay, but it's ridiculous, right? It's not the point. But what we see there is love. For the music, for the people, for the independence, for the early days full of illusions and some kind of unity between people. Because after 88, this crucial day for freedom, we see also the rock scene falling apart. Those guys stopped being friends. They stopped supporting each other. Everyone went his own road.